Record on this computer. Here we go. So Alexis, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I was just
Absolutely.
hoping you could start by just giving us a bit of an introduction to who you are and all of the amazing things you've been doing these last years, since apparently you were 7 years old and through middle school and everything else. You have an amazing resume already, and I would just love to hear about your journey.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'll start at about, I'll start at age 5. At age 5, I was fascinated by the visible light spectrum, and I got my mom to pull up the Wikipedia page and read it to me. And I was fascinated by the world in general. Then when I was 6.5, I went on a road trip across the country in an RV for 10 months with my mom, my sister, and my grandparents on my mom's side also were in an RV, and they had been for quite a long time, traveling from national park to national park. So we
That
went with
sounds
them.
amazing.
It was great. Yeah, I mean, I learned all about the natural and anthropogenic history of the continent. I got to see a lot of it in person, and it was really, really neat. I went on that road trip because my kindergarten teacher said that they couldn't meet my needs in the classroom. Basically, I was interested in, and I quote, concepts beyond my ears. And my mom and the teacher talked about it, and they thought that it'd be a good idea to go on a road trip. So we did. I was homeschooled from then until somewhere in middle school. And when I was 7, I had started to come up with some inventions. Like I had an idea for multi-stage rockets, model rockets. Little did I know that those already existed and that they worked exactly the same way. And then I had some ideas for like a suborbital reconnaissance, I guess, projectile. So it was quite a silly idea, but you know, I was very interested in how things worked. And so my mom remembers, and I think I remember saying this too. My mom remembers when I was about 7. I was about to go to sleep, and she was talking me in, and I said right before I went to bed that quote, "I hope I dream of new technologies." So I've always been really interested in creation of novel systems, basically, and my progression was fairly unremarkable. It was precocious for sure, but it was unremarkable until about age 11, where I started to work on science fair projects, and I believe I was a finalist or winner of 6 national and international science and invention competitions.
I saw this. You've been to the White House and all kinds
Yeah,
of things.
I introduced Dr. John Holdren, the science advisor to the president, back in 2015. Yeah, interestingly enough, I actually was at the time thinking about a type of ion thruster that would be right in the purview of his research focus. And I talked it over with him while I was there, and he thought it looked promising. I haven't gotten the chance to test it yet, though. So then in 2012, I produced the rescue truffle after seeing the articles about the Somali famine of 2011, in which, long story short, children were left by the roadsides to die because their parents often had multiple children and couldn't carry them all the way to refugee centers. I thought this was rather unnecessary. That there's obvious solutions. You give them some form of mechanical advantage to carry the kids, and so that's I designed something that could be, packed flat and airdropped in theory. It didn't end up happening. It's very difficult to get these things in the field as a kid. And I made one other invention too, the emergency mask pod, which was meant to deliver smoke masks to people trapped in the second stories of burning buildings who would otherwise likely suffocate, as smoke inhalation is the leading cause of death in fires rather than, heat related
Yeah.
stuff.
Or burns. Right.
Yeah. So then after that, I noticed that people were just blown away by the fact that I had invented things at that age, which confused me. Because, and I still think this, invention is not, it doesn't require an incredibly analytic mind. It requires a new perspective, and looking at a problem differently. Often this just means that you look at the problem in the context of another field that's normally not associated with it.
That's such a good point. It's about taking another point of view, and it's
Yeah.
also about creativity. And creativity is boosted by looking at the world from multiple points of view. They say that diverse and divergent thinking are the leading causes of innovation.
That would make a lot of sense to me. Yeah. So I spoke about that a fair bit, and at the conclusion of my sort of trajectory talking about innovation, I proposed a platform that would have been called USolve, which would basically machine match, sort of like a dating service, users interested in invention to or problem solving to problems posed by any given organization with or without a prize. And then they could submit their solution, and if it fits whatever criteria the person or entity who posed the question sets forth, they get the prize, and the entity gets access to the IP. And there are other formats, of course, that could happen for like royalties and so forth for the inventor. But
I love X Prize type setups. You get some amazing innovation, and it's really good as well for inventors and creators to just be able to spend time creating. And sometimes those prizes are really motivating for people, and they come up with amazing things.
Yeah. I actually, I participated technically in an X Prize challenge with the, actually I would have participated in two. I know the Big Hero 6 competition put on by Disney and X Prize was, an X Prize competition. I don't remember if the Iron Man 3 one was. So yeah, that's about how far my public career has gone.
You've done a lot of speaking.
Published some poetry.
Oh, yeah, right. And you said you published a novel, or you have a novel.
Oh, I haven't. I'm working on it. I've written a novel, planning on publishing it. No, it's actually what's called a Bildungsroman, which is basically a novel about the formation of the artist. In this case, it's not actually literally about me. It focuses on two characters who sort of portray different sides of my personality, and I used it as a sort of psychotherapy, frankly.
That's good. Yeah, I can see that would be really powerful. Well, tell me where you are right now. I mean, what do you think the adults of the world need to listen to and pay attention right now? I mean, that's the question I'm going to ask of all of our teenage participants in this is, what do we need to do different?
So I tend to look at things from a very, very, integrated point of view. We'll start out with the fact that evolution selects for the preservation and reproduction of an allele, the actual allele, not necessarily the whole genome, that allele. And so alleles that code for altruistic behaviors in the context of a given, or it's not even the allele, it's the structure of that allele plus other necessary infrastructure. When those are combined to produce an altruistic behavior, that's forwarded by protecting other individuals who are, phenotypically similar. And this is probably the reason that people are very discriminatory on the basis of visible traits and very overt personality traits. It's also the basis, almost certainly, of tribalism, which is a huge issue. We are not, as a nation, Pareto efficient from an economic standpoint. If we were, most people, no, all people, frankly, would be able to live reasonably comfortably, would have opportunity. Corporations would not. Corporations are basically heat harvesting engines. You can look at currency as a literal proxy for energy. And when a corporation amasses a lot of energy, a lot of money, or an entity in general, they can then use that energy to instill order in a system so that they can then extract more energy. It's thermodynamics. I mean, it is actually applicable very
Well, it's
literally.
exploitation too, and in this
It
case,
is. That's
it's
exactly right.
exploitation
Yeah,
of human resources and human
and it's a
potential.
huge problem.
Right.
We need to rework the economy significantly. I'm not suggesting going like full communism or anything, but we have the resources to provide for pretty much everybody pretty comfortably.
People can
And we would progress
produce.
faster as a species. We'd be less. We'd feud less because feuding usually happens as a result of scarcity.
Yeah, prosperity is the way forward, and abundance thinking is
Exactly.
the way
Yeah.
forward. And I often say this, human beings in one day, take your average human in a day, can produce way more in a day than they require to be sustained. If we work together cooperatively in the right way and build the right kind of systems, there's no need for these scarcity paradigms, except for certain resources
it's short
that
term.
we need to
It's
be
all short term thinking.
ourselves off of, right? Taking the
So
long view is key.
These corporations, right, they're trying to preserve their interests in the short term. We've got these extremely simple AI. That's what a corporation is. That's what a government is. Different, very different than a, silicon virtual neural network or anything like that. But it is literally an intelligent system that is artificial. And so you got this very primitive AI that is trying to maximize for short-term growth, basically, right? And so, yes, it makes sense for that AI in the short term, not in the long term. They're not benefiting themselves in like a 30-year long view. And we need to rework that. I'm not sure how. I think one place to start.
Short-sighted, yeah, pun intended. It's just, this short-term profitability motive that drives everything, and the financial incentives that drive everything, that end up only benefiting a few because we're actually living in a system of mass slavery. Yeah, those are paradigms that need to be completely rethought.
I totally agree with you. Information is another one. We need something like the fairness doctrine again. Information should not be a commodity. It should be free. We need to find a way to allow people to create information, without financial incentive. Because if we have financial incentive, it twists the information they will create. It's a giant feedback loop. It's like sensitization in the brain, where you have, a dopaminergic neuron that just is, two dopaminergic neurons, and they just fire repeatedly, one after the other, and they keep each other going and going and going. It's sort of like that, and you get distortion of truth.
Right. Also creative, I would say. Now, I believe creators and artists need to be paid, but if I could give the world free music, I would, and I think that's a paradigm we need to think about. How do we make music free? While also paying artists and creators extremely well for what they do, because the creative outputs of our cultures and societies are the things that sustain people and keep people hoping and keep people engaged, and then they start becoming creators themselves. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I was involved with the open source movement, and I remember seeing a documentary back in the 90s about what you're talking about how all information should be free. And I think you're absolutely right. And I love seeing the product of that in action. I grew up pre-internet. So I got my first computer at 15, but I wasn't on the internet till my early 20s. And seeing the way people can now construct their own knowledge and find their own paths and come up with stuff like you have, right? I mean, I had books to read, but the encyclopedias I had were from
It's so
1955.
much easier on the internet.
Mhm.
Index searching changes
Yeah, I can't
everything.
imagine what things would have been like. I got one of the first Walkmans. I was buying cassette tapes. I had access to a lot of
Oh, I remember
radio.
those. I used to have one.
Yeah,
I had
I
a cassette
watched
player. Yeah.
plenty of TV. I read a lot of books, and I spent a lot of my spare time creating or building or, doing whatever I could to amuse me.
Sounds like my life.
Right. I was lucky. I had a difficult childhood in many ways, but I had a great
So did I.
education and great teachers, and I loved school. And that's a place we need to get to as well.
Oh yeah.
My son,
Education is incredibly important.
it is so important, has been on a journey and was in a public school that was just not supportive of him in the way he needed, and he went through a very difficult time in middle school, which I know is extremely typical. um, and then he started at another high school here in Seattle that's a magnet school for extraordinary kids, I guess I would say. And it's been like night and day for him, to find
Oh
other
sure.
people like him
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah, to be included in a way that makes sense for him as,
My life
someone
has
who's
felt
not neurodivergent. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, my life's felt pretty solitary. I mean, I've got I present as Asperger's. Apparently, I'm not, according to basically every psychologist I've talked to. But I've also got bipolar one. It's well managed at this point, but it caused a lot of trouble. And I've got ADHD, a
Hmm.
general anxiety disorder. Let's see if there's anything else.
You sound to
Not
me
off the
like
top of my head.
just an extraordinarily intelligent kid who lives in a world that's doesn't make sense, and that
Yeah,
causes a
that's
lot of
sort of what it
pain
feels
and
like. I mean,
trauma and confusion. Yeah.
I don't like saying, I don't like saying positive things about my intelligence, because they're often misconstrued as being just me pumping up my own ego. But I tested at 151 when I was 8, on the WISC 4 extended norms. But there was a spoiled subtest, and if you replace that subtest with the other most closely correlated subtest, my score would jump up about 170, standard deviation 15. And then there are other things that were atypical about me. I had a lot of, field specific knowledge at that point, which wouldn't have shown up in the vocabulary.
They have no way
And
to
so
measure that kind of intelligence.
I'm not sure how smart I am, but it's greater than 170. Well, this is talking about general, the forget the index, but the like verbal spatial reasoning
Oh,
side
yes,
of
right.
things.
Hmm.
When you throw in my processing index, it's lower. My At the time, my processing index was like a 130. I think I got a 160 on one subtest, or one subtest in working memory and one in processing speed, but the others were lower. So it does bring my score down a bit, but the general outlook from uh, the gifted psychology community is that usually if you have a big discrepancy like that, you just omit the processing index entirely and focus on
Yeah, I
the
would. I don't score
central
terribly
intelligence
well
traits.
on intelligence tests. I apparently had my first when I was about 5. And I remember them asking me various questions. And one of the things I was supposed to do is make different shapes with my hands. So they asked me, can you make a circle? And I made a circle. And then they asked me, can you make a triangle? And I could make a triangle. And then they asked me, can you make a square? And I was thinking about my fingers. I couldn't figure it out. So I went like this, and I told the lady, right,
No, it
I
doesn't
didn't
work.
think
Yeah.
to do it like that. I told the lady to take her
That's not
pen.
even a square.
I know, but to take her pen and put
It's a
it
rectangle.
across the top of my fingers, right? Imagine little
Yeah.
hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it would be a square. And she looked a little
The
surprised.
tests aren't designed to measure really bright people, frankly. I mean,
They're not really,
the,
because
the
I gave a
subscale, the
creative
subscale,
solution that I probably didn't get credit for.
yeah,
I
the
think I
subscale that
tested at 130 or something. I was 5, but I've taken other tests since then, and I don't feel like I don't have a super mathematical mind. And while I
nor
have
do
a very
I.
logical mind, yeah, I
Well, I
feel
kind of do,
like they're
but
testing for things that are just difficult, and they don't
yeah,
do a good job with the intelligence tests of just
they
making
don't measure
people
actual
right.
performance in the real world. I mean,
No. And they're
on the
also
subscale,
frankly designed for men.
yes, absolutely they are. Yeah, and there are big cognitive differences.
Women have more
Uh,
white matter, which means
they
we have
do.
more connections. Yeah.
Yeah, which also correlates to greater verbal intelligence because you can integrate more information quickly
Mm-hmm.
across the various regions of the cortex.
Right.
And men seem to focus on, very piecemeal or serial reasoning via the use of the prefrontal cortex in concert with a few other areas. But the myelination is much lower, so they focus on step by step.
Yeah, they
For
don't take
instance,
into account like female multitasking. They don't take into
yeah,
account the sorts of skills we grow up with when we're taught to nurture, we're taught to keep house, we're taught to cook, we're taught to gather, we're taught to do all of those things. And when you live in a complex modern world, the sorts of skills we develop growing up, are really not very well understood. It's just, I think it's what makes a lot of women more capable when it comes to
yeah,
adulting and things like that. But it's not stuff that's easy to measure at all. Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
Like just women who know how to get stuff done, right? The household logistics experts and project managers and everything
Yeah,
else. Yeah.
I'll get to the neurology side of improving the world in a minute, but I'll quickly say one thing about the measurement of intelligence. So when I was about 15, I think I was 15, I hadn't yet taken calculus because, well, I had a rocky past with math, just due to the fact that I was taught math via rote memorization, and I didn't like rote memorization. I wanted to understand the principles because it was easier.
This
But
happened to me too, by the way. I lost the plot with geometry.
so I mean, I'm actually good at pure mathematics, but well, okay, some of it, the stuff that I have access to with my current knowledge, anyway. But I I didn't progress quickly. Anyhow, when I was 15, I hadn't taken calculus or pre-calculus. I hadn't been exposed to anything like the Riemann sums, and my grandfather gave me a physics problem that it had slipped his mind required calculus. You basically had to do a derivative. I sat there for about 40 minutes staring at it, thinking, Jesus, this is weird. I've never done anything like this before. But I managed to figure out, the limit process, and it was fairly intuitive. Once I latched onto the right approach, and by about 45 minutes, I was done. Handed it in. It was correct, and then they realized it required calculus. I'm like, what the hell? So,
But you
but
reinvented some calculus, right? Just
basically, yeah.
magically. Yeah.
And that's not measured. That sort of thinking is not measured on IQ tests, or a little bit of it is, but it's not well measured. Like big jumps in reasoning like that, intuition, if you will, it's not super useful on extremely simple, like matrix reasoning problems. So But
Well, they
anyway,
were,
yeah,
they built those intelligence tests when they were looking for people who could be engineers and scientists and mathematicians. But as a STEM person or as a STEAM person, I guess I would probably say about myself in
yeah,
particular, those of us who have these creative abilities, there really isn't a good way to measure any of that.
yeah,
And there aren't good ways to anticipate it either. So, the tests are so limited in their efficacy. I was given the tests and declared gifted when I was 5 or 6 years old. But my school wasn't able to do anything about it. So the solution was to pull me out of public school and put me into a very small Christian school, which actually worked. It was okay. It was a nice school. And what they knew how to do was just to keep challenging me, right?
oh, that's good. Yeah,
So yeah, that worked. And they were nice people and they were good Christians. And it wasn't dogmatic or the kind of setup where I was being told I was subservient or anything like
yeah.
that. It was very much about helping me
So not
find
like Catholic school
potential.
or something
I
like that.
spent 6 months in Catholic school and I got that in Catholic school for 6 months. And then I was put back
Lovely.
into nice little Christian school again. So yeah, it does make a big difference. Well, we only probably have a couple minutes left. You
Okay.
said you were going to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
the neurology of progress.
Basically, yeah. So there are a couple things we can do to improve the world, like the way people function socially. Um, the first is to basically provide education on psychology, especially psychology of persistent or generational trauma, because these things often affect how people parent. And it just keeps going and going and going until someone in the chain starts looking at it and thinking, this isn't right. I need to fix this.
Stop repeating cycles, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I understand this well. I come from a family that had a long history of cultural violence, right? People from the South, people who
Yeah,
were sort of Dust Bowl warriors, who thought teaching their children to be difficult and violent was the way to help them survive, and
yeah,
making them tough and all of that sort of typical stuff. So I get what you're saying. It is really key.
yeah. And then education on economics, proper education on economics should be available to everyone, ideally. And then, but we'll get into the neurological or functional side of things. We probably do need to, if possible, increase the average intelligence a bit, so that people can engage in more complex critical thinking, vet information, understand the actions of people of power who are not acting in good faith. We need to
The
be able to hold them
critical
accountable.
thinking skill set, for instance,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. There are ways to improve intelligence, I think. It shouldn't be impossible. There are lots of correlates that we could work with.
Well, we know
But
that a lot of it is nurture.
yes,
We've had all of
yeah,
these discussions. Is it
I
nature?
agree.
Is it
Yeah.
nurture? It's nature to the extent that children are healthy and well nourished and happy, I guess I would say. But nurture is absolutely a huge
Oh, it's
indicator, and the
incredibly important. Yeah.
stronger your early childhood interventions are and the better your education systems are, it's you get huge increases in
Yeah,
intelligence in one generation. I think they call it the
absolutely.
Flynn
The
effect.
Flynn.
Right, over
Yes, the
time.
Flynn effect. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, how intelligence increases. And you're right, because what's happening right now, especially if we look at the current government in the US, is they're depending on people to be ignorant in order to be able to continue with, fascist and
Yes.
tyrannical tendencies. Hitler, this was what Hitler was all about. Repeat the lie,
Yeah.
make it big, just repeat the lie over and over and over again. And we've stopped privileging
Basic disinformation
critical
tactics.
thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, just standard Nazi era propaganda that they are just now repeating. So you're
Yes.
absolutely right that that is critical right now.
And then one last thing about the process of mind. Over time, it would be good to figure out the genetics that code for, if you will, pro-social traits, altruism, and of course, any genetic intervention would have to be voluntary. I'm not for
But
forcing
can we
people to
give you an
change.
altruism implant, and will that make your life better?
In theory, you might be able to, yes. I
Or
mean, not
or
an implant, but
microdose
gene
you,
therapy. Yeah.
or gene therapy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, these are all really good points. And human augmentation really has just begun, and there
It
is
has.
this whole era in front of us. And if we can hack ourselves to be the sorts of humans we want to be on a voluntary and opt-in basis, we
Yep.
should absolutely make those options available. And how do we solve some of the major
No, those should be
problems
open
in the
source too.
world? Open
Nobody should be
source.
making money off that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And how do we get, people off terrible street drugs that they shouldn't be on, though? So there's
Oh,
a
I've
certain
got some
amount of
ideas on that.
grassroots. You do. Better
Yeah,
drugs.
I've been doing some research on the interwoven etiology that is cause of schizoform disorders, affective disorders like bipolar, depression, ADHD, autism. Uh, they're all fairly interconnected, but then addiction is correlated with a lot of those due to actions in the you could look at it from one perspective as dopaminergic action. A lot of it's actually to do with protein messengers and stuff that are already elevated and
But
can
there are
cause increased
vulnerabilities
sensitization.
that encourage certain kinds of addictions because
Yes,
certain kinds of
and
drugs feel really good to a deprived
we
brain.
can reset those things with enough data. If we look at people, get their genome, look at blood levels of certain proteins and minerals and so forth. Minerals are important, by the way. They're bivalent cations, and also monovalent. But get those levels. Family history, history of substance use in general, and then their own mental health history. When you have all those together, you can basically figure out what's going wrong and which messenger systems you need to interrupt or downregulate, or which proteins you need to make sure are more heavily expressed. And we have the technology. This is something that I'm going to push for fairly soon, hoping to actually get like a research group going on it. And I think
That
it's extremely
sounds really
important.
exciting. No,
If we
it
can
absolutely
annihilate,
is. Let's fix people, please.
yeah, if we can deal with mental illness in a way that doesn't, dampen people's ability to think or feel happy, and if which we can, and if we can do that prophylactically in people who we know are susceptible, we avoid these problems in the first place. So we avoid trauma, which is very problematic. Trauma in general just tends to lead to a shorter fuse. We can end up with a culture that's less dysfunctional. I mean, that's the idea.
Well,
and
that's
also, if we avoid,
paramount.
if we can, if we can reduce addictive tendencies, we also, allow people to have greater executive function, greater impulse control, and they're less likely to drive their lives into the ground by no fault of their own, just because they have, unfortunate protein expressions.
Unfortunate protein expressions. And on the
But
other
we can
hand,
fix people.
yeah. And I think we also need to be realistic about the fact that people want to use substances recreationally,
They do.
and we need to make sure that there are substances that are safe. And I
I
believe
agree.
very much in the harm reduction model. I don't think that
I
just
like what Portugal's
telling the
done,
world.
frankly.
Who's that?
With a little bit more, I like what Portugal's done, but I'd like to see more regulation.
Oh, what are they doing?
They have everything decriminalized, literally everything.
Oh, I think I've heard about this. And actually, the data that you see is really interesting because it starts solving a lot of social problems when you
Yeah.
decriminalize. Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I'm going to let you run, but it was really great to get a download from you, if I can call it that. You're our first person that we're interviewing for this event we're trying to put together for next month.
Oh,
So
well, that's cool.
I appreciate getting your perspective. Yeah, we want to really educate people on the fact that designing the future is absolutely what we need to do, and that we have plenty of capability and talent like you and great ideas out there in the world. So we need to figure out how to make them happen and become, and invent the future culture instead of just letting tyranny wag the dog, right? While
Yes.
decent people don't really know how to plug into solutions. So that's where we're at. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And thank you
Can
so
I make
much.
one closing remark?
Of course.
Okay, so I know a lot of the ideas that I've expressed seem a little bit controversial from an ethics standpoint, and there are ethical challenges. However, if you look at things in the long view,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what's important. First of all, we're doing everything opt-in in theory, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
But in the long view, if we don't get this right, a lot of people kill each other. A lot of people exploit each other. Maybe we end up with, and especially in the context of global warming and the subsequent migrations, we might end up with nuclear conflict if we don't fix our mob psychology. I mean, the perfect future, if you will, is a digital reality with assets that can be duplicated as much as you want. You can have whatever you want. Moving towards post-scarcity will reduce a lot of the social problems. It'll take effort. We're going to have growing pains, but we need to do it.
Yeah, we need an abundance mindset. And that will be what finally changes everything for us all. I'm fairly certain of that. And everything we do has ethical considerations, right? And everything we do should be approached in an ethical manner and should be explored from a strong ethics point of view. But just because we have possible concerns, it doesn't mean we don't explore the possibilities, because things need to change, and they need to change now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Alexis.
All right.
I really appreciate you taking the time. Yep, we'll get back in touch with you soon, and I hope you have a great time over these next few weeks.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.